Her hands were bound, her mouth was gagged, and the water was rising. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. All she could do was pray that anyone would notice she was gone. But no one inside that mansion was looking for a maid. No one except a dog. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that subscribe button right now, turn on the bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The rain started the way bad things always do, quietly at first. Just a low rumble somewhere past the tree line, the kind of sound you could convince yourself was nothing. A truck on a distant road. Wind pushing through the old oak branches. Nothing to worry about. Dahlia Ashford told herself that. She was good at telling herself things were fine. She had been telling herself that for 3 months now. She pressed her palm flat against the cold stone wall of the servants' corridor and listened. The house had its own kind of breathing, deep, slow, and full of things no one talked about. She had learned to read it the way you learn to read a person's face. A creak from the east staircase meant someone was up late. Silence from the kitchen after 9 meant Mrs. Hargrove had locked the pantry and gone to her room. And when the lights in the study stayed on past midnight, that meant Rowan Farrow was still awake. And when Rowan Farrow was still awake, you stayed invisible. Dahlia understood that rule better than anyone. She had understood it from the very first day she walked through the service entrance of the Farrow estate with a single duffel bag on her shoulder, 6 weeks pregnant, and not a single person in the world who knew where she was. That was exactly how she needed it. She had taken the job through a private agency, one of those old-fashioned referral services that didn't ask too many questions as long as your background check came back clean. Hers did. She'd spent 4 years as a house manager for a retired judge in Greenwich. Her references were impeccable. Her hands were steady. Her face gave away nothing. The agency had described the position in 3 words: discretion is essential. Dahlia had smiled at the woman across the desk and said, "That's never been a problem for me." What she hadn't said was, "I'm hiding, I'm scared, and I am running out of time." The Farrow estate sat at the end of a private road in the outer edge of Litchfield County, Connecticut. 12 acres of land surrounded by iron fencing and old-growth trees that blocked out the world so completely that sometimes standing in the back gardens, Dahlia forgot the rest of civilization existed. The main house had 18 rooms, 3 floors, and a basement that no one on staff was permitted to enter. She hadn't asked why. She'd learned early on that asking why in this house was the fastest way to find yourself escorted back to the service entrance. There were 6 staff members, including herself. They moved through the house like ghosts, efficient, silent, purposeful. They did not eat together. They did not socialize. They passed each other in hallways the way strangers pass on a subway platform, eyes forward, bodies angled slightly away. And at the center of it all was him, Rowan Farrow. She had seen him for the first time on her 3rd day at the estate. She'd been restacking linen in the 2nd-floor closet when she heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that belonged to a man who had never once in his life been told to quiet down. She had pressed herself against the shelves instinctively, not out of guilt, just habit. He'd walked past the closet without pausing. She'd seen him through the crack in the door. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark suit jaw, tight like he was holding a conversation with himself inside his own head. No phone in his hand, no papers, just walking, thinking, filling the corridor with a kind of gravity that made the air feel heavier. He hadn't glanced her way. Good. That was good. That was exactly what she needed, except that Bobby had. Bobby was a Neapolitan Mastiff, and he was enormous. The first time Dahlia saw him, her entire body went rigid with instinct, 140 pounds of muscle and loose wrinkled skin, with eyes that were calm and ancient and deeply unsettlingly intelligent. He was sitting at the foot of the grand staircase watching her the way a judge watches a defendant. Every member of staff had warned her about Bobby. Don't approach him. Don't call him. Don't make eye contact if he's with the boss. Mrs. Hargrove had said it with such finality that Dahlia had assumed the dog was aggressive, territorial, dangerous. He was none of those things. He was simply particular. He didn't warm to people easily. In 3 months on the estate, Dahlia had watched him ignore guests, growl at vendors, and remain entirely unmoved by the delivery driver who brought him imported treats every Tuesday. But on her very first morning, when she had been alone in the kitchen at 5 a.m., because sleep was becoming a stranger to her, Bobby had walked in, crossed the entire room, and sat down next to her chair. He hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't done anything. He'd simply sat there beside her in the gray early light, warm and steady and unbothered. She had looked down at him. He had looked up at her. And something in her chest, some wound she'd been keeping tightly bound since the night she ran, had trembled. "Don't tell anyone about this," she'd whispered. His ears had moved, listening. She had laughed for the first time in months. It was brief and broken, and barely a laugh at all, but it was real. And in a house built on silence and strategy and secrets, it felt like an act of rebellion. The rain was getting louder now. Dahlia moved through the servants' corridor toward the back of the house, carrying a stack of fresh towels to the linen closet near the east wing. Her shift had officially ended an hour ago. She'd stayed late. She always stayed late. Not to impress anyone, simply because the alternative was lying awake in her small room above the garage with her hand on her stomach, counting the weeks doing math that terrified her. 14 weeks now. She hadn't told anyone. The loose-fitted uniform helped. The fatigue she explained away as migraines. She had an appointment with a doctor in the next county. Not here, never here. Every 3 weeks, paid in cash. She had a plan. It was not a good plan, but it was the only one she had. Stay invisible, save money, leave before anyone notices. Simple. Clean. Except that plans, in her experience, had a way of collapsing the moment you needed them most. She heard the voices before she reached the corner. Low. Intentional. The kind of voices people use when they want to be heard by no one. Dahlia stopped walking. Her hand went instinctively to the wall. She recognized one of the voices, immediately Grant Farrow Rowan's younger brother. She had seen him twice since she'd started working at the estate. Both times he had looked at her the way some men look at furniture, not with contempt, exactly just with the complete absence of acknowledgement that a person was there at all. The second voice was a woman's, Vivian, Rowan's fiancée. Dahlia had never spoken to Vivian directly. Vivian did not speak to staff. She communicated through Rowan or through Mrs. Hargrove, and her instructions always carried that particular flavor of authority that belongs to people who have spent their entire lives being deferred to. She was beautiful in a way that felt deliberate and cold in a way that felt practiced. "It's becoming a problem," Grant was saying. "She's a maid," Vivian said. The word came out flat, almost amused. "She's not a problem. She's an inconvenience." "An inconvenience," Rowan has noticed. A pause. "You've seen how the dog behaves with her. Bobby doesn't warm to anyone." Rowan has noticed. He notices everything. A long silence. Dahlia held her breath. She was aware distantly and with a strange calm that her heart had started pounding. "Then we handle it," Vivian said, quietly, "before he gets back from the city. He gets back tonight. Then we don't have much time." Dahlia told herself she had misunderstood. She was good at that, at taking something frightening and sanding it down to something manageable. She told herself they were talking about firing her. A dismissal, a conversation with Mrs. Hargrove, a check handed over, a ride to the bus station. She told herself that on the walk back to her room. She told herself that while the storm outside started throwing itself against the windows. She even told herself that when she heard the knock on her door at 9:15 p.m. sharp, official, the kind of knock that wasn't really a question. She opened the door. 2 men stood in the corridor. She didn't recognize either of them. They were not house staff. They were wearing dark coats, and they were wet from the rain, and neither of them was smiling. "Mrs. Hargrove needs you," the taller one said. "In the basement storage. Something's broken." Dahlia looked at him, then at the other one, then back at the first. "Mrs. Hargrove doesn't work nights," she said quietly. The taller man smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "There's been an exception." She should have run. She knew that. Somewhere in the part of her brain that had been on alert for months, the part that had rehearsed exit routes and calculated distances and kept her emergency bag under the floorboard beneath her bed, she knew exactly what this was. But the other part of her, the part that was exhausted and frightened and 14 weeks pregnant in a house full of strangers, made a different calculation. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe if you cooperate, it stays nothing. That part of her was wrong. She followed them down the back staircase, through the kitchen, and out through the utility door into the storm. The rain hit her like a wall. She opened her mouth to say something, to ask where they were going to say the basement is that way, and the cloth came over her face before the words could form. Not to smother her, just enough to make her legs stop working, to make the world tilt sideways. to make the night go soft and strange at the edges. She didn't feel herself fall. She didn't feel anything for a long time after that. She woke up cold. That was the first thing, the cold not the kind that comes from weather, but the deep interior cold of stone and earth and underground. Her face was pressed against something rough. Her wrists were behind her back and something bound them. Not rope zip ties, the plastic kind, the kind that tighten when you pull against them and don't loosen. Her mouth tasted like rain. She opened her eyes. She was at the bottom of a pit. It took her several seconds to understand that because the word pit felt too extreme, too cinematic, not the kind of thing that happened to a person like her, a maid, a woman hiding in plain sight, a woman whose biggest gamble was hoping no one looked at her too long. But there it was, stone walls, maybe 8 feet deep, a wooden platform old slick with moisture beneath her, and above her the storm sky cracked open and pouring itself down. She could hear the water before she felt it, a low, steady rush not from rain alone, from somewhere underground, a drainage channel maybe, or an old garden cistern, something that hadn't mattered in dry weather, something that no one had thought about in years. The water was coming in at the base of the pit wall. Slowly, but it was coming. Help! Her voice came out smaller than she expected. Swallowed by the storm, by the stone, by the distance between her and the house. She pulled against the zip ties, the plastic bit into her wrists immediately. Help! Louder this time. Someone! She stopped herself. Because thinking clearly, she had to think clearly meant accepting the following. The people who had put her here did not want her found. The people in that house who weren't those people had no idea she was missing. The storm would cover any sound she made. The pit was behind the estate past the maintenance outbuildings in a part of the property she had only seen once from a distance and never returned to. Nobody was coming for her, unless she thought of Bobby. She thought of the way he had sat beside her in the dark kitchen on that first morning, calm and steady and absolutely certain, like he had already decided about her, like he had made up his mind and that was that. Dogs can smell fear, she had once read, but the good ones smell something else too. They smell who needs them. Bobby, she said, not shouting, just saying it, into the water and the dark and the rain, like a prayer. Inside the house on the second floor landing, Bobby lifted his head. He had been still for the past hour, lying at the top of the stairs in the posture that the staff had learned to read as waiting. He waited like this when Rowan was away, patient, anchored, like a compass needle pointing at magnetic north. But now something shifted in him. His ears moved first. Then his whole massive body came up off the floor in a single fluid motion. He turned toward the back of the house, toward the utility corridor, the kitchen, the door that led to the storm outside. He stood completely still for 3 seconds. Then he moved. At the edge of Litchfield County, on a rain-slicked highway that the GPS had stopped trusting 20 minutes ago, Rowan Fierro's phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He didn't look at it. He had been driving for 2 hours out of the city, and the storm had turned the last 40 miles into a negotiation. The weather offering darkness and flooded shoulders, Rowan responding with velocity and silence. He drove the way he did most things, focused entirely on the thing in front of him, aware of everything peripheral, giving nothing away. The meeting in the city had gone poorly. He had not expected it to go poorly, and that irritated him more than the meeting itself. Rowan Fierro did not like being surprised. He had built 38 years of his life around the idea that preparation was the only legitimate form of control. You controlled what you could anticipate. You anticipated everything. Almost everything. His phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen this time, a number he didn't recognize. He let it go. He was 20 minutes from the estate. He rolled his shoulders, once a small concession to the tension in his body, and pressed his foot harder against the accelerator. Something had been sitting wrong in his chest since he'd left that morning. Not about the meeting, before the meeting, before he'd even gotten in the car. Just a low, unnameable pressure, the kind he had learned over many years not to dismiss. He called the estate from memory. 4 rings, 6, Mrs. Hargrove's voicemail. He hung up without leaving a message and drove faster. Back in the pit, the water was now at Dahlia's ankles. She had tried everything methodical first, working the zip ties against the stone wall, looking for a rough edge, shifting her weight to test the wooden platform for any give or weakness, calling out at regular intervals. listening carefully in the spaces between rain for any sound of movement above. Nothing, nothing, nothing. The water reached her shins. She made herself breathe. She made herself think about the one thing that mattered more than her fear right now, the one thing that gave the fear a direction instead of letting it become paralysis. 4 more inches and the cold will be dangerous. She was 14 weeks along. She was standing in rising water in an underground pit in a Connecticut storm, her hands behind her back and her feet going numb. Things she told herself. She had been hired because she was competent. She had survived the last 4 months because she was resourceful. She had stayed invisible in that house because she was intelligent and careful, and she paid attention to everything. Think. There has to be something. She pressed her back against the stone wall and began to feel along it with her bound hands, slowly, methodically, starting from the base and working up as far as her arms would reach. Her fingers found something on the 3rd pass, a crack, horizontal, maybe 8 inches wide, and within it she had to work 2 fingers in straining until the zip tie burned a rusted metal edge. A bracket of some kind, old, very old, set into the stone so long ago that part of it had half crumbled out of the mortar. She worked her wrists against it. The zip tie caught. She pressed harder. The plastic held, and then on the 4th pull, with the water now at her knees and the cold moving up through her like a slow emergency, she felt something give. Not much, a fraction. But a fraction was enough to keep going. Rowan turned onto the private road at 11:43 p.m. The estate gates opened before he reached them. Motion sensors his security team had installed 2 years ago keyed to the car. The headlights cut through the rain and swept across the front of the house, and everything looked the way it always looked, closed, controlled, impenetrable. He was halfway up the front steps when he noticed Bobby was not at the door. It was such a small thing, such an unremarkable absence on any other night. But Bobby was always at the door. In 3 years, through late returns and business trips and 1 3-week absence while Rowan was hospitalized with a shoulder that had been restructured, by circumstances he didn't discuss, Bobby was always at the door. Rowan stood on the top step in the rain and felt the pressure in his chest sharpen into something specific. He pushed the front door open. Bobby. Silence. He moved through the foyer, through the front sitting room, past the staircase. The house was quiet in the way it got late at night, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Something was off in the frequency of it. Something was listening instead of just sleeping. He heard the movement before he saw it, a low, heavy sound from the direction of the east corridor. Then Bobby appeared around the corner, moving fast for his size, and he stopped in front of Rowan and did something he rarely did. He made a sound, not a bark, not a growl, something lower and more urgent than either a sound that seemed to come from somewhere behind his rib cage, from whatever part of a dog's body holds the things they cannot say. Rowan looked at him for 1 long second. "Show me," he said, and Bobby turned and went. He followed the dog through the east corridor into the kitchen past the utility room. Bobby stopped at the back door, the one that led out to the maintenance path behind the house, and turned back to look at Rowan with an expression that in a human face would have been called urgency. Rowan put his hand on the door. Then he stopped. On the small table beside the door, the table where staff left their outdoor keys and the groundskeeper left his schedule, there was a handkerchief, white, folded. He picked it up. It was his. He recognized the monogram. He kept them in the top drawer of his study, and he had not given anyone permission to touch them, and more importantly, it was folded wrong. In his family and his world, there was exactly one meaning to a white handkerchief. Folded along its diagonal instead of its square. I need help. I cannot say it, but I am trying to tell you. His father had taught him that, decades ago in a different house under different circumstances. His hand closed around the handkerchief. He looked at Bobby. Bobby was already moving through the door and into the storm. Rowan followed him into the dark. The rain hit him like a reprimand. He didn't stop for a coat, didn't stop for anything, just followed the dog's massive shape through the downpour, past the equipment sheds, down the maintenance path into the section of the property that no one used anymore, the old section, the part that had belonged to the original structure before his grandfather had built over it. Bobby stopped. He was standing at the edge of a stone-walled enclosure, an old cistern, overflow a drainage feature from the original estate, long forgotten, fenced off years ago, the gate left unlocked because no one ever came back here. Rowan looked down into the pit. The water was up to her waist. She was still standing. Her hands were behind her. Her head was up. And she was looking at the sky, not at him specifically, not yet, because the rain was in her face and she couldn't see clearly but up. Like she was refusing to look at the water instead. For one instant, one fraction of a second, Rowan Fierro, a man who had not been surprised by anything in 15 years, felt something move through him so forcefully that he had to set his feet wider to stay steady. Dahlia. Her head turned, even in the dark, even through the rain. He saw the exact moment she recognized that it was him, and he watched the expression on her face go through 3 complete changes in the space of a single breath: shock, relief, and then hardening, resolving, becoming something careful and deliberate again. The water, she said, just that. Not help me, not please. Just the fact of it spoken flat and precise like a report. I know, he said. He was already moving. He got her out in 4 minutes. He never said how he simply did it with the speed and efficiency of someone who had solved physical problems under pressure many times before. A rope from the equipment shed, a foothold cut into the stone, his own hands, which were very strong and completely steady. He pulled her up over the edge, and she sat on the wet ground, and he cut the zip ties with the knife he kept on him, the small one, the one she had never been close enough to see before, and when he did, she made a sound. Just one, small and involuntary from the pain of blood returning to her wrists. He sat back on his heels and looked at her. She held her wrists against her chest. Her uniform was soaked through. She was shaking from cold, from shock, from the effort of whatever she'd been doing to keep herself upright before he arrived. Can you walk? He said. Yeah. Yes. Are you hurt? A pause. The kind of pause that contained something she was deciding whether to say. I need to get warm, she said instead. He nodded once and stood. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took it. Bobby pressed himself against her left side as they walked, enormous and warm, a living windbreak, his heavy shoulder against her hip, as if he'd done this 100 times before, as if it were simply what he did. Rowan said nothing. He kept his hand around hers steady and without ceremony and walked her back through the storm toward the house. And neither of them looked back at the pit. Behind them in the distance, a light moved in the trees, a flashlight or a phone held by someone who had been watching. Someone who had expected a very different outcome tonight. Someone who was now very, very still. The night wasn't over, and neither was the storm. If this story has you gripping your seat, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to know where in the world my story is being heard tonight. He brought her in through the back. Not the service entrance, the kitchen door, the one that opened directly into the warmth and light, the one that staff used when they didn't want to be seen crossing the main floor. Rowan knew every entrance to this house the way a surgeon knows a body. He knew which doors were watched, which hallways carried sound, and which routes allowed a person to move from one end of the estate to the other without being observed by anyone who might be paying attention. Tonight, he used that knowledge for the first time not to protect himself, but to protect someone else. Dahlia said nothing on the walk from the pit to the house. She was shaking, but she was walking, and she kept her chin level, which told him more about her than anything she could have said. He'd seen grown men who carried weapons and built careers on intimidation come apart in situations with half as much fear in them. She just walked, controlled her breathing, kept moving. Bobby stayed pressed to her left side the entire way. Inside the kitchen, Rowan let go of her hand and moved to the cabinet above the stove where Mrs. Hargrove kept a supply of emergency items, heat packs, a first aid kit, a stack of thermal blankets left over from an outdoor event 2 winters ago. He pulled one out and held it toward her without ceremony. She took it and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then she sat down slowly in the same chair she'd been sitting in the first morning Bobby had found her. Whether she knew it was the same chair, he didn't ask. He turned away to give her a moment running water into the kettle because he needed something to do with his hands and because she needed a minute to be a person before she had to be anything else. How long? He said with his back to her. She understood what he was asking. About 40 minutes, maybe 50. I lost track. He set the kettle on the burner. And before that, the walk from the house to the pit. I was unconscious for part of it. He turned around at that. She met his eyes without flinching. Her wrists were on the table, red and raw, where the zip ties had been. She was still shaking, but her voice was flat and informational, the voice of someone who had decided that the only way to get through the next 10 minutes was to treat what had happened to her as a series of facts instead of a catastrophe. He looked at her wrist. "You need those clean," he said. "I know. The first aid kit. I can do it myself." She said it immediately, automatically, and then stopped. Seemed to hear herself. The edge of something crossed her face. "I'm sorry, that was thank you for coming. You left a handkerchief." She blinked. "Just once. You recognized it." "I taught you to fold it that way," he paused. "Except I didn't. I've never spoken to you about handkerchiefs." She looked at him steadily. "I found it on the floor of the utility corridor 3 weeks ago. It had your initials. I kept it because—" She stopped, looked down at her hands. "I don't know why I kept it. I just did. And when they brought me through that corridor tonight, I managed to get it out of my pocket and leave it on the table. I didn't know if it would mean anything. I didn't have any other options." Rowan looked at her for a long moment. The kettle started to hiss. "It meant something," he said quietly. He sat across from her while she drank the tea. Hot, strong, the kind his housekeeper made, that could restart a stopped heart, and he watched her come back into herself, degree by degree. The shaking slowed. Color returned to her face in gradual stages. Bobby lay under the table with his head on her feet, keeping them warm. "Tell me what you heard," Rowan said. She looked up from the mug. "All of it," he said, starting from the corridor. She told him. She didn't perform it, didn't editorialize, didn't reach for sympathy. She laid it out in sequence, the way you file a report. The voices, the words, the knock on the door, the 2 men, the cloth over her face, the pit, the water. The only thing she left out was the part where she had thought she was going to die, but he could fill that in himself. When she finished, Rowan said nothing for so long that the silence had weight. "Grant," he said finally. The word came out with nothing attached to it. No anger, no disbelief, just recognition, like a man putting a name to a diagnosis he had been avoiding. "And Vivian," Dahlia said. He didn't respond to that. She watched him carefully. "You're not surprised." "I'm not permitted to be surprised," he said. "In my position, surprise is a liability." "That's not an answer." He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, something small, almost imperceptible, but she caught it. She was very good at reading faces. She'd had to be for a long time. "No," he said, "I'm not surprised." He stood up and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she didn't press him because she recognized what that posture meant. She'd carried that posture herself many times. It meant, "I am deciding what to be now that I know this." "The 2 men who took you," he said, still facing the window. "Did you recognize either of them?" "No, but they weren't local. Their accents were—" She thought about it. "Pittsburgh, maybe, or further west, and they moved like they'd done something like that before. Which means they were hired. Which means Grant had this plan before tonight," she said. "The storm was a convenience, not the cause." He turned around. She held his gaze. "I'm sorry, I know he's your brother." "He's been my brother for 34 years, Rowan said. "That's long enough for me to know exactly what he is." So she should have gone to bed. He had told her to firmly, with a tone that most people in that house would have obeyed without a second thought. He had told her the situation was being handled, that she was safe for tonight, that he would have 2 men stationed outside her room by the time she climbed the back stairs. She had nodded and said yes and walked as far as the utility corridor before she stopped. Because something was wrong. Not with her. Not with the house, not the storm, not even with the lingering terror of what had happened tonight. Something else. Something she had been turning over in her mind since she sat down in that kitchen, since the warmth had reached her fingers again, and she had started actually thinking instead of just surviving. Grant had planned this. Not tonight before tonight, which meant he had been watching her, which meant he knew something. She pressed her back against the corridor wall. What does he know? She ran through the past 3 months with the efficiency of someone conducting an audit. The appointment in the next county, she'd been careful, different car services, each time always cash. Her room, she'd swept it twice for anything that might give her away. The loose uniform, the careful posture, the hours she chose to be, in which parts of the house. But there had been one slip, one moment about 6 weeks ago, when she had been caught off guard. Mrs. Hargrove had asked her to cover a task in the East Wing, cleaning the private sitting room adjacent to the room Vivian used when she stayed at the estate. Dahlia had been quick and thorough, and she had been on her way out when she'd reached up to adjust a painting that had been sitting crooked, and her uniform had pulled tight across her midsection. Vivian had been in the doorway. She hadn't said anything, just looked. The way a woman who notices everything looks at something she is filing away for later. Dahlia had straightened the painting and walked out and spent the next 3 days convincing herself she was paranoid. She was not paranoid. Her hand went to her stomach, an automatic gesture, the thing she did when the fear got specific. Okay, she thought. Okay, so they know. And Rowan doesn't. She stood in the corridor for 10 seconds. Then she turned around and went back to the kitchen. Rowan was on the phone when she walked in. He had his back to the door, and he was speaking in a low-clipped voice, not English. Something adjacent to it, something she half recognized from years of working in households where the language shifted depending on who was in the room. Italian, maybe, or a dialect of it. He heard her come in and turned. He ended the call without saying goodbye. I told you to go to your room, he said. I know. She stayed near the door. There's something I didn't tell you. He waited. She took a breath. I need you to know something about me first, before I tell you the rest. I need you to understand why I didn't say anything and why I'm saying it now. Dahlia, please. He went still. She looked at him directly, and she did not make it easier on herself than it was. I came to this house under false pretenses. Not about my qualifications, those are real. Not about my references. But I omitted something from my application that the agency would have required me to disclose. He said nothing. I'm pregnant, she said. 14 weeks. The kitchen was very quiet. Bobby lifted his head from under the table. Rowan's expression did not change, not in the way she'd feared, not with the flash of anger or the immediate calculation she'd been bracing for. He simply absorbed it, the way he absorbed most things she was realizing. Into that large, controlled silence he carried around with him. How long have you known, he said finally, since before I applied? And the father is not a factor, she said. Flat, final. She didn't say it with anger or pain, just with the particular firmness of someone who has made a decision and intends to live by it. He held her gaze for a moment. She didn't know what he was looking for. She didn't look away. Vivian saw, Dahlia said, about 6 weeks ago in the East Wing. I think that's what started this. Rowan exhaled slowly through his nose. She told Grant, that's my guess. I think whatever their plan was, I don't know what I represent to it. A witness to something, a liability of some kind. Maybe nothing more than a distraction they wanted removed. But they moved tonight specifically because you were away and the storm gave them cover. She paused. And because they thought no one would come looking for a maid. Rowan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was even. You survived 40 minutes in a rising pit with your hands bound. You left a signal using a handkerchief you had no reason to believe I would recognize. You walked out of there without assistance, and now you've come back here to give me information you could have kept to yourself. He tilted his head slightly. You are not what anyone in this house thinks you are. She looked at him. I'm a maid, she said. That part is real. That part, he said, is the least interesting thing about you. He made her go upstairs after that. This time she went. She lay on the narrow bed in her room above the garage, and she listened to the storm wind itself down outside, slower now, less violent, settling into the long gray exhaust of itself. Her wrists had been cleaned and wrapped. She had changed into dry clothes. Bobby had followed her up the stairs and was now lying against the door, a warm and immovable fact in the dark. She stared at the ceiling. The thing she had been most afraid of someone knowing had happened, and it had not gone the way she'd rehearsed it. In her rehearsals, there was always a dismissal, a check, a car to the bus station. That was the outcome she had planned for the one she had run the numbers on, the one that left her on her own again, which was something she knew how to do. She had not planned for Rowan Fierro to look at her like that, like she was not a problem to be managed, but a person he had decided to see. She pressed her hand to her stomach and closed her eyes. We're okay, she said softly. For tonight, we're okay. Rowan did not sleep. He sat in his study with the lights low and a glass of something he wasn't drinking, and he thought about his brother. Grant was 4 years younger. He had been a difficult child and an easy adult, which was the most dangerous combination Rowan knew. The difficult child meant capability, intelligence, a certain ruthless efficiency. The easy adult meant it had all been redirected, not eliminated, just channeled somewhere quieter, somewhere that could be missed. Rowan had not missed it. He had simply allowed it, given it room to exist because the alternative was confrontation, and confrontation with Grant had always required a cost that Rowan was not ready to pay. Until tonight, he picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again. He did not call Grant. There was no version of that conversation that helped him. Grant would deny everything smoothly, fluently, with just enough injured confusion to make Rowan question himself. And by the time the call ended, Grant would have moved whatever he needed to move, erased whatever needed erasing, and the two men from the pit would be somewhere he couldn't reach them. Rowan knew his brother. He set the phone down and leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling with the same unseeing focus he'd been raised to use when things were impossible, when there was no good option and several bad ones, and you had to choose the one that preserved the most important thing. He thought about what the most important thing was. He thought about it for a long time. In the corner where he'd placed it on the edge of his desk, the white handkerchief lay folded on its square, not its diagonal. He had refolded it when he came upstairs. The way his father had taught him meant danger, meant I need help. But folded square meant something else. It meant I am still here. I am still standing. We are not finished. Well, at 2:14 in the morning, Grant Fierro sat in a car a quarter-mile from the estate and answered a call from the number he'd been waiting to hear from. "It's done," he said, a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that changed rooms. "There was a complication," the voice said. Grant's hand tightened on the phone. "What kind of complication?" The toe. He stopped, collected himself. "Explain." "The dog found her first. Then Fierro followed the dog. She's out of the pit. She's inside." The silence that followed lasted a long time. "Is she talking?" Grant said. "We don't know." "Then we have a problem." He said it quietly, without inflection, the way he said most things. The way their family had always spoken about difficulties, as though naming them plainly made them smaller, more manageable. "Get back to me when you know more." He ended the call and sat in the dark and thought about his brother. Rowan, who never slept before 2 a.m. Rowan, who noticed everything. Rowan, who had just walked back into the house with a woman who knew enough to be dangerous and a loyalty toward her that Grant had until tonight significantly underestimated. He had made a mistake, not a catastrophic one. Not yet. But the window was closing. And Grant Fierro, whatever else he was, had never been a man who let a window close on him without going through it first. He started the car. He drove toward the estate. The motion sensor on the eastern gate pinged at 2:22 a.m. In his study, Rowan's secondary phone, the one connected to the property's security system, the one that even Mrs. Hargrove didn't know existed, vibrated once. He looked at the screen. Eastern gate, one vehicle. Plate number he knew by memory. He set the phone face down on the desk. He did not stand up, did not reach for anything, just sat in the silence of the study and let his face go through whatever it needed to go through, the grief of it, the anger of it, the long, exhausted weight of 34 years arriving at this exact moment, and then put it somewhere he could close the door on. When he stood, his face was even, his hands were still. He walked to the door of the study and opened it and stood in the hallway and waited for his brother to come to him. Because that was the thing about Rowan Fierro, that the people who worked for him had learned early, and the people who worked against him had learned too late. He never went to you. He waited. He let you come to him. He let you make the first movement and reveal the shape of yourself in it. And when you arrived, he already knew everything. He already knew what this was, and he had already decided what happened next. The front door opened, and Grant walked in from the rain. Grant Fierro had a gift for walking into rooms like he owned them. He did it even now, soaked from the rain, uninvited, arriving at nearly 2:30 in the morning at a house that technically belonged to his brother, with the same loose, unhurried confidence he'd carried since childhood. Like the world had a habit of accommodating him, and he saw no reason that should stop. He stopped when he saw Rowan in the hallway, just for a beat, half a second, the kind of pause a man makes when the room turns out to have a different temperature than expected. Then the smile came up, easy, practiced, The smile of a man who had spent 34 years learning exactly how much warmth to apply and exactly where. Rowan. He spread his hands slightly, a gesture of openness, of nothing to hide. I saw the lights on from the road. Figured I'd check in. The storm had me worried about the property. Rowan said nothing. Grant's smile held. You just get back a while ago, Rowan said. Good, good. Grant looked around the hallway with the comfortable ease of someone on a casual visit. Mrs. Hargrove up, I could use something hot. It's miserable out there. Mrs. Hargrove is asleep, Rowan said. It's 2:30 in the morning. Right, of course. Grant laughed softly, self-deprecating. Charming. I don't know what I was thinking. He looked at his brother. Everything all right? You look tense. Rowan looked at him for a long moment. The hallway was quiet enough that the silence had texture. Come into the study, he said. It was not an invitation. Grant sat in the chair across from Rowan's desk with his leg crossed and his hands loose in his lap. And he looked at his brother with an expression of mild, patient attention, the expression of a man who has nothing to fear and wants to make sure you know it. Rowan stood. He didn't sit. He never sat when he needed the other person aware of the geometry of a room. The eastern gate logged your car at 2:22, Rowan said. Not the front, the east road, the one that doesn't show up on the main security feed. A tiny shift, imperceptible to anyone who didn't know Grant's face the way Rowan did. I always use that route when I'm coming late. You know that. I do know that, Rowan said. I also know that you've used it 3 times in the past 2 weeks, on nights when I was away from the property. Grant said nothing. The property logs every entry, Rowan said. It always has. I set that up 4 years ago and I never mentioned it because there was no reason to mention it. Until tonight, there was nothing interesting in the logs. He paused. Tonight there was. The smile had gone somewhere quieter now, still present but doing different work. Rowan. Don't, Rowan said. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Grant closed his mouth. I need you to make a decision right now, Rowan said. Not tomorrow, not after you've had time to think about what version to give me. Right now in this room, I need you to decide whether you're going to sit in that chair and lie to me or whether you're going to tell me what actually happened tonight. A long pause. I don't know what you think happened. Her name is Dahlia, Rowan said. She's been a member of this household for 3 months. She is sitting upstairs right now with wrapped wrists and hypothermia she is too stubborn to admit to, and she has told me exactly what she heard in that corridor and exactly what happened after. He came around the side of the desk, not close just enough to change the angle. So I'm going to ask you one time, was it your idea or Vivian's? The room went very still. Grant looked at his brother. For the first time since he'd walked in, the performance dropped, not completely, not all at once, but enough. Like a coat opened at the chest, enough to show what was underneath. She was a liability, he said finally. His voice had changed, gone quieter, more like his own. You were getting distracted. I could see it. The way you looked at her, the way the dog acted with her. You don't see it, Rowan. You never see it when it's happening to you. Distracted, Rowan repeated. There are people watching this family right now, people who are looking for weaknesses for leverage for anything they can use. And you were developing an attachment to a woman who walked in off the street, who had her own secrets, who we knew nothing about. Grant leaned forward. I was protecting you. I was protecting the family. You put a pregnant woman in a pit, Rowan said. The silence that followed that sentence was a different kind of silence. Grant stared at him. Something moved behind his eyes. She's 14 weeks. Rowan's voice was flat, absolute. So what you did tonight wasn't removing a liability from a Mafia estate. What you did tonight was attempt to drown a pregnant woman and her child in a drainage pit behind a house that has my name on the deed. He paused. I need you to understand that I understand that completely. Grant's jaw tightened. The easy confidence was entirely gone now. What was left in its place was something harder and less comfortable, something that looked. If you studied it carefully, like a man realizing the ground beneath him has been different than he thought for quite some time. Vivian saw an opportunity, Grant said. She came to me. She was the one who... I know what Vivian did, Rowan said. I'll speak to Vivian separately. Right now, I'm speaking to you. He looked at his brother steadily. Did you know she was pregnant when you made the decision? A beat too long. No, Grant said. Rowan studied him. No, Grant said again firmer. I didn't know. Vivian didn't say. I thought we were removing a security risk. I didn't know about. He stopped, pressed his fingers against his forehead. For a moment, just one, he looked like the younger brother he had actually been. Like the 12-year-old who used to follow Rowan through the halls of a different, darker house learning how to be something the world hadn't broken yet. I didn't know Rowan. Rowan looked at him for a long time. And then he said the thing that cost him the most. I believe you. Grant looked up. That makes it worse, Rowan said quietly. Not better. You gave an order without knowing all the facts. In our world, that is not a defense. That is the definition of what we don't do. He stepped back. You need to leave this house tonight. I want you off the property within the hour. Rowan. The two men you hired, their names by morning. Every piece of contact information you have for them. I want it sent to Marcus before sunrise. Marcus was Rowan's head of security, a man who had been with the family for 19 years and who Grant knew better than to underestimate. If there's anything else connected to this that I need to know about now is the last moment you'll have to tell me voluntarily. Grant sat very still. And after that, Rowan said, we'll see what's left. It was not a threat. It was something more devastating than a threat. It was a verdict with the sentencing postponed, and they both knew it. Grant stood. He straightened his jacket with the hands of a man reconstructing his posture around a wound. He walked to the door of the study and stopped with his hand on the frame. The woman upstairs, he said without turning around. What are you going to do? That, Rowan said, is none of your concern. Grant left. Rowan stood in the quiet of the study and listened to the front door close and the sound of a car engine starting in the distance. He stood there for a long time. Upstairs, Dahlia was not asleep. She had heard the front door. She had heard the low rumble of voices below, not the words, just the shape of them, the particular vibration of two men saying difficult things to each other in a room with old walls. She had lain on her back in the dark and listened to that shape and tried to read it the way she read everything carefully without assumption, taking only what the evidence actually gave her. Bobby was at the door. When the voices rose slightly below, his ears moved. When the front door closed and the car pulled away, he went still again. She let out a breath she hadn't fully realized she was holding. The footsteps in the hallway came sometime later, slow, deliberate stopping outside her door. A knock. Not the sharp official knock of two men she didn't recognize. Two quiet taps, the kind that leave the choice entirely to the person inside. She sat up. Yes. The door opened. Rowan stood in the frame. He looked for the first time since she had known him like something had shifted in his foundation, not collapsed, nothing as dramatic as that, but moved, like a house after a tremor, still standing, but aware of what the ground could do. He's gone, Rowan said. She nodded. I heard the car. The men who were in the pit with you tonight, they won't come back. I'm having the situation addressed. She didn't ask what addressed meant in his vocabulary. She understood in a general way what kind of man he was and what kind of family this was. She had understood it from the second week of her employment when a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear had told her more than a month of observation. She had filed it under not my business and stayed in her lane. Okay, she said. He looked at her. You should sleep. I know. Neither of them moved. Bobby's tail moved once across the floor. I owe you an apology, Rowan said finally. What happened tonight happened in my house, under my name, to someone in my employ. He said it without performance, not confessional, not dramatic, just straight and clear the way he said everything. I'm sorry. She looked at him for a moment. You came into a storm, she said. In the middle of the night, you got me out of a pit. A pause. I'd call that even. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't quite a smile, more the shadow of one, the suggestion of the muscle's memory of something warmer than his default expression. Get some rest, he said. Rowan, he stopped. Vivian, she said, she's still in the house. He was very still for a moment. How do you know that? The light in the East Wing sitting room, it's been on since you got back. I could see it from this window. She met his eyes. She's waiting to find out what happened, whether it worked. He looked at her. She doesn't know I'm here. Dahlia said. Does she? Not yet, he said. Then she's up there, assuming everything went according to plan. Dahlia held his gaze. That's useful information, if you want it to be. The look he gave her then was one she wouldn't forget. Not soft nothing so simple as that, but considering. The look of a man recalibrating who he's dealing with. Go back to sleep, he said. But it was different this time. Quieter. With something underneath it that felt close to respect. He closed the door. Vivian Marsh had been waiting in the East Wing's sitting room for 3 hours. She was not a woman who waited well. She was a woman who planned who moved, who arranged outcomes in advance, with the precision of someone who had learned early that the world does not offer things to people who stand still. She had grown up in a family where waiting meant losing, and she had carried that lesson into adulthood with the devotion of a convert. She heard Grant's car arrive and leave without him coming to her. That was the first thing that told her something had shifted. She heard the footsteps in the main house, Rowan's unmistakably that particular weight and cadence moving in patterns she couldn't reconcile with the night she had planned. She sat in the chair by the window, and she thought with the cold clarity of a woman who knows how to assess a situation about her options. The maid was either dead or she wasn't. If she was dead, everything was as planned. Grant had handled it. Rowan would notice the absence in the morning, ask questions, receive answers that amounted to nothing provable, and life would continue. The Fierro estate would continue. The engagement would continue. And the particular set of arrangements that Vivian and Grant had been quietly constructing for the past 8 months would continue to develop at exactly the pace they'd designed. If she wasn't dead, Vivian stood up. She walked to the door of the sitting room and opened it and listened to the house. She had excellent instincts. She had built an entire life on those instincts. Reading rooms, reading people, reading the specific temperature of a silence and knowing what it meant. And this silence, this particular configuration of sounds and absences, told her something she did not want to know. The maid was in the house. She could feel it. Not literally she hadn't seen her, hadn't heard her, but there was a quality to the air in the east corridor, the way the sounds arranged themselves, the faint smell of something warm and medicinal. Antiseptic, maybe the kind you'd use on an injury that crept up the back staircase and found her like an accusation. She stood in the doorway for 30 seconds. Then she made a decision. She would go to Rowan herself. But she found him in the main hallway, standing there as if he'd been expecting her, which she would realize only later he had been. Rowan. She put warmth in her voice. Concern. She arranged her face into the expression of a woman who has been worried, who has been waiting, who is relieved to see him. She was excellent at this. She had been doing it for years. I heard the car. I was worried about you, the storm. Stop, he said. Just that word. Nothing raised, nothing sharp, but it landed with enough weight to stop her mid-sentence. She looked at him. His face was completely even. That was always the most frightening thing about Rowan, she had thought, from the very beginning, not when he was angry, but when he was like this. When his face was a closed door that told you nothing and gave you nothing to work with. I know what you did, he said. She opened her mouth. I know what you asked Grant to do, he continued. I know about the 2 men. I know about the pit. I know what you told Grant you saw in the East Wing 6 weeks ago, and I know how you used that information. A pause. I also know that Grant came to me tonight. He told me his part, and the parts he left out Dahlia filled in. Vivian's expression didn't break. She had too much practice for that. But something did change. Something beneath the surface in the place where the performance was made. A tightening, a rapid adjustment, the equivalent of a computer running a new calculation faster than the human eye can follow. She's lying, Vivian said. Her voice was completely steady. Whatever she told you, she's a woman who came into this house under false pretenses. Who hid. She's pregnant, Rowan said. And you knew. And you used it as a reason to have her killed. Silence. I did not, Vivian said. I told Grant she was a security risk. I told him she needed to be removed from the estate. I did not tell him to. You told him to handle it, Rowan said. You used those exact words. In the corridor outside the second-floor linen closet at approximately 9 p.m. tonight, because you knew I wasn't here, because you knew the storm would cover the sound, and because you calculated correctly that no one in this house was going to report a maid missing. He looked at her. You calculated wrong on one point. She looked at him and said nothing. Bobby, Rowan said simply. Something crossed Vivian's face, then something she could not entirely suppress. It wasn't fear exactly, it was the particular expression of a woman who has built a careful architecture and watched one impossible variable bring it down. The dog. The one thing in the entire estate that operated on a logic she could not anticipate, could not manage, could not charm or redirect. A 140-pound animal with the emotional intelligence of someone who has never once in his life needed to pretend. "I want you to leave," Rowan said. "Tonight. I'll have Marcus return your belongings within the week. There will be no engagement announcement. There will be no conversation in public about what this was or wasn't. You will have that as a courtesy." He paused. "It is the only one you'll receive." She looked at him steadily for a long moment. And then, because she was intelligent, because she had not survived this world by being stupid, she nodded. "You're making a mistake," she said. Not with anger, with the quiet certainty of a woman who still believed in the architecture even as she walked away from Maid. "I've made a few," Rowan said. "You were one of them. Tonight I'm correcting it." She walked past him to the staircase. She did not look back. Rowan stood in the hallway and listened to her footsteps overhead, the opening and closing of drawers. The sounds of a woman dismantling a version of her life with the controlled efficiency of someone who had always, in the deepest part of herself, known this night might come. He stood there until the sound stopped. Then he walked back toward the kitchen. Bobby was in the hallway outside Dahlia's door when he reached the top of the service stairs. The dog looked at him, that ancient, patient, measuring look, and then looked at the door and back at Rowan. Rowan crouched down to the dog's level, which was something he never did in front of anyone. He put his hand on the side of Bobby's enormous head. "Good boy," he said quietly. Just that. Private and direct, the way he said things when no one was listening. Bobby leaned into his hand, eyes half closed, entirely unbothered by the night they had all just lived through, as if he had simply done the thing the moment required the way good creatures do, and was now prepared to do the next thing whenever that came. Rowan stayed like that for a moment longer than was necessary. Then he stood. He looked at the closed door of Dahlia's room. He thought about what was on the other side of it, a woman who had survived tonight by being more capable than anyone in this house had given her credit for. A woman who was 14 weeks pregnant and had spent 40 minutes in a rising pit without breaking. A woman who had come back to the kitchen when she could have simply gone to her room because she had information he needed and she decided he should have it. He thought about the handkerchief on his desk. Folded square now. "I am still here. I am still standing." He put his hand briefly against the door. Not knocking, not intruding. Just there. Present. On the other side of the wood, Bobby pressed his nose to the gap at the bottom, and Rowan could have sworn he heard the quiet sound of a woman who had been trying very hard not to cry, finally allowing herself to do it. He didn't knock. He stood there for one moment, his hand on the door, the house settling into quiet around him. The storm entirely gone now, leaving behind that particular post-storm stillness that feels like the world inhaling slowly after a long-held breath. Then he stepped back. He walked down the hall. There was a great deal still ahead. There were conversations with Marcus, decisions to make about grant arrangements to reconfigure a situation to manage with the precision that situations in his world always required. But right now, there was a woman in a room at the end of that hall who was still breathing. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like the most important fact in the house. She slept 4 hours. Not because 4 hours was enough. It wasn't, not after a night like that, not with the kind of exhaustion that goes past the body and into the bones, but because at 6:14 in the morning, her eyes opened on their own and refused to close again. Her body had made a decision without consulting her. It had decided that sleeping any further in this house on this particular morning was a form of vulnerability she could not afford. Old habit, bad habit, the kind you develop when you've spent long enough being the only person responsible for your own safety. She lay still for a moment and ran an inventory the way she always had done every morning for the past 4 months. Wrists sore, rapid and functional. The baby, she pressed her hand flat against her stomach and held it there, counting breaths, feeling for any sign that last night had taken something from her that she couldn't afford to lose. Nothing alarming, a low ache across her lower back that was probably from the cold and the stress and the standing and rising water for the better part of an hour. But the baby felt fine. Steady. Still there. Still hers. She closed her eyes briefly. Okay, she whispered. Okay, we made it. Bobby was still at the door. He heard her moving and lifted his head, but didn't stand, just watched her with those calm, ancient eyes, the ones that made her feel irrationally like he had been through worse than this, and come out the other side and was quietly communicating that she would too. She got dressed. The house had a different quality in the early morning, not softer exactly, but less armored. She moved through the back staircase and into the kitchen and found to her genuine surprise that the kettle was already on. Rowan was sitting at the kitchen table. He had a cup of coffee in front of him and a phone face down beside it and a look on his face that told her he had not slept. Not a single hour. She could see it in the specific stillness of him. Not the stillness of rest, but the stillness of a man who had been sitting with difficult things all night and had reached the particular state of exhaustion where the body simply stops announcing itself. He looked up when she came in. "Sit down," he said, not a command, more like an offering. The closest thing to an invitation she had heard from him. She sat. He poured a second cup without asking and pushed it across the table. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The kettle ticked. Bobby came in behind her and went directly to his corner and lay down. Outside, the world was doing what worlds do after storms, reassembling itself quietly like nothing had happened. "How are you feeling?" Rowan asked. "Like I spent 40 minutes in a pit," she said. "That's accurate." "How are you feeling?" she asked. He looked at her. The question seemed to land somewhere he hadn't expected, not because it was complicated, but because no one had asked it. She could see that plainly on his face, the slight recalibration of a man who was accustomed to being the person who asked that question and never the person it was directed at. "Like I spent all night cleaning up something that should never have happened in my house," he said. "That's also accurate," she said. Something settled between them. Not comfort exactly, they hadn't earned comfort yet, they barely knew each other, but a kind of mutual acknowledgement. "We are both still here. This is the morning after. We are dealing with it." She wrapped her hands around the cup. "Vivian's gone. Last night. And Grant, a beat. Grant is being dealt with." She nodded. She didn't ask what that meant. In the vocabulary of Rowan Fierro, being dealt with occupied a spectrum, and she understood instinctively that the details of that spectrum were not hers to know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "I need to ask you something," Rowan said. She looked at him. The father of the child. He said it carefully, deliberately not making it a demand. "You said he wasn't a factor. I'm not asking because I need to know for social reasons. I'm asking because if there's a person connected to your situation who represents a risk, I need to understand the shape of it." She set down her cup. She had rehearsed this conversation in the abstract, not specifically with him, but with the general shape of whoever eventually asks. She had planned something clean and minimal, a version that told just enough and gave away nothing that could be used. But she was tired, and she was sitting in a kitchen with a man who had come into a storm for her, and she was 14 weeks along, and last night she had almost died, and the clean, minimal version suddenly felt like more work than she had energy for. "His name is Daniel Marsh," she said. Rowan didn't move. "He's Vivian's brother," she said. The silence that followed that sentence was enormous. Rowan set down his cup with the controlled precision of someone putting something down very carefully because the alternative is not careful at all. "Say that again," he said. "Daniel Marsh, Vivian's younger brother." She held his gaze. "I didn't know who she was when I took this job. I didn't know there was a connection. I found out about 6 weeks ago, the same day she saw me in the East Wing. I was looking for a household reference in the staff records room, and I came across her full name and her family contacts, and..." She stopped. "And I understood immediately that I was standing in exactly the wrong house." "But you stayed," Rowan said. "I had nowhere else to go," she said simply, "and I needed 3 more pay cycles to have enough to get somewhere safe." She looked at him. "I had a plan." "Your plans," he said with something that under different circumstances might have been dry humor, "have a complicated relationship with outcomes." "I know," she said. "I'm aware." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Does Daniel know about the pregnancy?" "No, I left before I found out. She paused, chose the words. "He's not a safe person, not violent, not toward me specifically. But he is connected in ways I don't fully understand to people who are. And the child would not be safe in his orbit." A pause. "Neither would I." Rowan picked up his phone from the table. He turned it over once in his hand without looking at it. A thinking gesture she was realizing the way some people tap a pen. Vivian didn't know, he said, that it was Daniel's child. She knew I was pregnant. She didn't know whose. Dahlia looked at him steadily. If she'd known, last night would have been very different. She wouldn't have wanted me removed. She would have wanted the child. For leverage, for the connection to Daniel and to whatever he represents in your world. Rowan looked at her. Which is why, she said, I need to know what you're planning to do with this information. Because right now, you're the only person who knows all of it. And what you do next determines whether I need to leave this house in the next hour or... She stopped herself. Or what, he said quietly. She held his gaze. Or whether there's another option. The other option took 3 hours to negotiate. Not dramatically, it wasn't a dramatic conversation exactly. It was methodical and careful and occasionally very difficult and conducted almost entirely in the kitchen over a second and third round of coffee while Bobby slept in his corner and the morning moved around them. Rowan spoke to Marcus on the phone twice, brief coded exchanges she could hear but not fully decode. He sent 3 messages she didn't see the content of. Once he stood and walked to the window and stood there for a long time with his back to her, and she let him because she understood what that posture meant, and she had learned not to rush a man who was deciding something real. What emerged from those 3 hours was this: she would stay. Not as a maid that fiction was no longer useful or safe, as a protected resident of the Fierro estate under Rowan's direct authority until the situation with Daniel Marsh and its connection to Vivian and Grant could be fully assessed and addressed. She would tell Rowan everything she knew about Daniel, the connections, the names, the specifics she had overheard in the 18 months she had been with him before she left. In exchange, the Fierro estate's considerable resources would be applied to making sure Daniel Marsh could not find her. You understand what you're agreeing to, Rowan said. If you give me this information, I will use it, not gently. I know what you are, she said. Do you? I know what this house is, she said. I knew it within the first 2 weeks. I chose to stay anyway for my own reasons. She looked at him. I'm not naive. I'm practical. And practically speaking, you are the safest option available to me right now. That's a very cold way to describe a situation, he said. It's a cold situation. He looked at her. Again, that recalibration, that small, deliberate shift in how he was reading her. I have one condition, she said. You're in my house, he said. You don't... I have one condition, she repeated calmly. The child. Whatever happens with Daniel, whatever this arrangement means going forward, the child is mine. No Fierro claim, no family interest, no leverage. My child stays mine. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Agreed, he said. She nodded. Then we have a deal. He held out his hand across the table. She looked at it, then she shook it, firm, brief, professional. The handshake of 2 people who have just signed something that will change both their lives considerably and are being adult enough not to make more of it than that. Bobby's tail thumped once on the floor from the corner. By noon, the estate had begun to feel different. Not in any physical way. The house was the same house, the hallways the same hallways. The particular quality of the light through the east windows unchanged from any other afternoon. But the staff moved differently. Word had traveled, as word always does in a closed house, through the specific underground telegraph of shared meals and exchanged glances and things said around corners. Vivian was gone. Grant had not appeared at breakfast. And Dahlia Ashford, the quiet maid who kept to herself and who everyone had assumed was temporary, was sitting in the main dining room having lunch across from Rowan Fierro. Mrs. Hargrove brought the soup herself. She set it down in front of Dahlia with the particular care of a woman making a statement through an act of service, head-high hands, precise the expression of someone who has made a decision about where her loyalties land and has decided not to be subtle about it. The East Wing guest room is available, Mrs. Hargrove said to Rowan, if you'd like me to prepare it. Please, Rowan said. Mrs. Hargrove looked at Dahlia briefly, not unkindly. I'll have it ready within the hour. She left. Dahlia looked at Rowan. She knew, she said quietly. Mrs. Hargrove has been with this family for 22 years, he said. She knows almost everything that happens in this house. Then she knew what Grant and Vivian were planning. She suspected, he said, which is not the same thing, and she would not move without my direction. A pause. She moved in that direction this morning. By bringing the soup herself. By bringing the soup herself, he confirmed. Dahlia looked down at the bowl. Simple gesture. Enormous meaning. She had spent 3 months being invisible in this house, moving around corners, staying out of sight, making herself as small as possible in a space where smallness felt like the only safe option. And now here was this woman, this severe and careful woman, who had given her nothing warmer than instructions for 3 months, setting soup down in front of her like she was someone worth feeding. She picked up the spoon. Her hand was steadier than it had any right to be. "I need to ask you something," she said. Rowan waited. "Last night, the handkerchief." She looked at him. "You said it meant something. The way it was folded, your father taught you that." "Yes." "And the other fold, square, what does that mean?" He was quiet for a moment. "It's a private language," he said, "in my family." He looked at the table briefly, then back at her. "Folded diagonal, I need help. Folded square." He stopped. "What?" she said. "It means I am protecting someone. It's what you left when you were watching over someone who couldn't protect themselves." A pause. "My mother used it when we were children. She would leave it where my father would find it." Dahlia looked at him. "I refolded it square when I came back upstairs last night," he said. "I don't entirely know why I'm telling you that." She did not look away. "I think you do," she said quietly. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds, which was in the economy of Rowan Fierro's expressions a very long time. Then he picked up his spoon. They ate in silence, and it was the most comfortable silence she had experienced in this house. Marcus arrived at 2 p.m. She had not met him before. She'd seen him once from a distance on her first week, a compact, deliberate man in his 50s with the kind of face that gave away exactly as much as it intended to and nothing else. He came into the study where Rowan had asked her to wait, and he sat across from her, and he opened a small notebook, and he looked at her with the professional neutrality of a man who had assessed many situations and intended to assess this one thoroughly. "Everything you know about Daniel Marsh," he said, "in sequence if possible. Start with how you met him." She started. It took 40 minutes. She told it without editing, without softening, the way she had learned to do things when she understood that the truth told plainly was the most useful version of itself. The relationship, the 18 months, the names she had heard, the conversations she had been present for, the specific night, 8 months ago when she had understood that she needed to leave and had spent the following 6 weeks quietly engineering an exit. Marcus wrote things down. Occasionally he asked a question, precise, specific, the question of someone who already knows the shape of something and is filling in the details. Which told her that Daniel Marsh was not unknown to the Fierro network. Which told her that this information was not new, just confirmation of things already suspected. When she finished, Marcus looked at his notebook, then at her. "You never used what you knew," he said. "In the 18 months you were with him, you heard things. There would have been people who would have paid well for what you heard." "I know," she said, "but you didn't." "I was trying to leave quietly," she said, "not burn the house down on my way out. Those are different goals." Marcus looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his expression, not warmth exactly, but the professional cousin of it. Respect in its most functional form. He closed the notebook. "We'll need you available for follow-up questions," he said. "Don't leave the property for the next 72 hours. "I wasn't planning to," she said. He nodded once and left. She was in the East Wing guest room, which was 3 times the size of the room above the garage, and had an actual window seat and a bathroom she didn't have to share with anyone when she heard it. A knock at the main door downstairs, not the service entrance, the front. She moved to the hallway before she could stop herself. Old instinct. In her experience, knocks at front doors in the middle of the afternoon carried the same quality as footsteps behind you on an empty street. Probably nothing, but you didn't ignore them. She stood at the top of the main staircase and looked down. Rowan opened the door. A woman stood in the entrance. Not Vivian, someone older, 60s maybe, with the kind of bone structure that advertised a family with money, and the kind of expression that advertised a family with grudges. She was dressed impeccably, and she was carrying a leather document folder, and she looked like someone who had driven a significant distance for a conversation she had been planning carefully. Dahlia couldn't hear the words, but she could hear the tone, and the tone was not good. Rowan's posture changed as the woman spoke. Subtle, if you didn't know how to read him, you wouldn't see it, But Dahlia had spent 3 months learning this house by reading the people in it, and she saw it clearly: a shift in his shoulders, a slight forward movement of his weight, the contained tension of a man receiving information that requires significant internal processing. He said something, short, controlled. The woman said something longer. Rowan's head turned just slightly, just a degree toward the top of the stairs, toward where Dahlia was standing. She stepped back before he could see her, or maybe he already had. She wasn't sure. She went back to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands flat against her knees and thought about what the posture of a man like Rowan Fierro looked like when someone was delivering news that connected to her. Because it had. She was certain of it. The way his head had turned, the fraction of a degree that pointed him physically in her direction. Someone had come about her, or about the baby. She looked at the door of the room. Bobby was on the other side of it. She could hear him breathing the slight shuffle of his weight. He had not moved from her door all afternoon, as though he had assigned himself to a post and had no intention of abandoning it. She stood up. She crossed to the door and opened it and looked at Bobby and said very quietly, "Okay, who is that?" Bobby looked at her with those eyes. "Right," she said, "unhelpful." She stepped into the hallway. She moved to the top of the staircase again, staying back from the edge, and she listened. The woman's voice was clearer now. She had stepped further into the foyer, pushing the conversation forward with the body language of someone who was not going to be managed out of the house before she'd said what she came to say. One sentence came through clearly. Just one. "The child changes everything, Rowan. You know what Daniel will do when he finds out. You know what his family will do." Rowan said something she couldn't hear. The woman responded, "She cannot stay here. I'm telling you this as someone who has known this family for 30 years. She cannot stay here, and you cannot protect her from what's coming. Not from inside this house." Silence. Then Rowan's voice, even and final. "Watch me." The door closed. Dahlia stood at the top of the stairs with her hand on the wall and her heart doing something complicated in her chest. 2 words, that was all. Said to a woman with a leather folder in 30 years, in a warning delivered at 2 in the afternoon like a bill coming due. "Watch me." She stood there for a long moment. Then Bobby pressed his enormous head against her hip, warm and solid and entirely certain, and she put her hand on him and stood in the quiet hallway of a house that had tried to kill her yesterday and was against all probability and planning, beginning to feel like somewhere she might be allowed to stay. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know who that woman was, or what Daniel would do when he found out, or how many more people were about to arrive at that front door with warnings and document folders and 30 years of history she wasn't part of. But Rowan Fierro had just closed a door on behalf of a woman he had known for 3 months. He had said 2 words in a tone of voice that left absolutely no room for negotiation. And downstairs she heard his footsteps crossing the foyer, heading for the stairs, coming back to her. She was still standing at the top of the stairs when he reached the bottom of them. He looked up. She looked down. Neither of them pretended they hadn't just been part of the same moment from opposite ends of a hallway. "You heard," he said. "Some of it," she said. "Enough." He came up the stairs. Not rushed. Rowan Fierro did not rush. She had learned that, but with the particular forward momentum of a man who has made a decision and is moving toward it. He stopped 2 steps below the landing, so they were at eye level, which she understood instinctively was deliberate. He was not going to stand over her for this conversation. "Who was she?" Dahlia asked. "Her name is Catherine Aldor," he said. "She's been a legal advisor to this family for 3 decades. She knew my father." A pause. "She's not wrong about Danielle. When he finds out about the pregnancy, and he will find out these things don't stay contained, his family will move. They have resources, they have lawyers, and they have the kind of appetite for leverage that makes them very motivated." "She said I can't stay here," Dahlia said. "She said that," he agreed, "and you said." "I know what I said." She held his gaze. "I need you to mean it, not as a strategy, not because of what I know about Daniel or what information I gave Marcus. I need it to mean something real, or I need to know right now so I can make different plans." Her voice didn't shake. She had used up her shaking the night before. "I can't be someone's asset. I've been that. I know what it feels like, and I know how it ends." Rowan looked at her steadily. "You are not an asset." "Then what am I?" He was quiet for 3 seconds. long enough that she felt the weight of it, long enough that she understood he was not reaching for a convenient answer, but for an accurate one, which in her experience was a much rarer thing. "You are someone I brought in out of a storm," he said, "and I don't release what I bring in." It was not a romantic declaration. It was not soft or embellished or designed to make her feel better. It was simply a fact, stated in the vocabulary of a man who dealt in facts and meant them. She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Bobby appeared from the guest room doorway and positioned himself between them with the satisfaction of an animal whose entire read of the situation had just been confirmed. Marcus came back at 4. He came with a second man Dahlia didn't recognize, younger. Early 30s, sharp eyes, and the kind of careful stillness that told her he was used to rooms where one wrong word had consequences. He was introduced as Eli, and he sat at Rowan's left and said almost nothing and listened to everything. "Daniel Marsh knows you're in Connecticut," Marcus said. He set a single photograph on the table taken from a distance, clearly surveillance, grainy at the edges. Her, coming out of the medical office 3 counties over 7 weeks ago. "He's had someone on you since at least this date, possibly longer." Her stomach dropped. She had been so careful. Different cars, cash, staggered appointment times. She had done everything right, and it hadn't been enough. And that particular specific failure, the failure of careful people, the worst kind, moved through her like cold water. "He doesn't know about the estate specifically," Marcus continued. "Not yet. But given Vivian's departure last night and the likelihood that she'll make contact with her brother, the timeline compresses," Rowan said, "significantly." Marcus looked at Dahlia. "We have a window, maybe 36 hours before Vivian talks and Daniel starts putting the geography together." 36 hours. She sat with that number and felt it for what it was, not a comfort, but a fact. A number to work with. She had always done better with numbers than with feelings. "What are the options?" she said. Marcus looked at Rowan, a question in the look. "How much does she get to be part of this?" Rowan said, without looking away from the table. "She's in the room, speak to her." Marcus turned back to her. "Option 1, we move you. New location, new cover, airtight enough that Daniel can't follow the thread. Slower build, higher safety margin, but it means leaving the estate." "Option 2, she said. "We don't move you. We let the timeline run and we meet Daniel's move before he can make it. Which means using what you gave us, the connections, the names, and moving against his network's credibility before he can leverage this situation. It's faster, more aggressive, higher risk of collateral noise." "And option 3, Eli said from the left. It was the first thing he'd said. Everyone looked at him. He looked at Rowan. "You call him." The room went quiet. "Call Daniel directly," Eli said. "Not through intermediaries. You personally. You establish contact as Vivian's former fiancé, which is a factual connection, and you make him understand the specific nature of your interest in this situation before he has time to frame it himself." He looked at Dahlia. "He doesn't know what you mean to this house yet. Right now, you're just a location he's trying to confirm. If Rowan calls first, Daniel spends the next conversation trying to understand the geometry instead of advancing his own." Dahlia looked at Rowan. Rowan was looking at Eli with the expression he used when someone had said something he was already thinking. "That's the option," Rowan said. It was not a question. "That's the option," Eli confirmed. Marcus leaned back. "It's a risk. If Daniel reads it wrong—" "He won't read it wrong," Rowan said. "He'll read it exactly right. That's the point." Dahlia looked at the photograph on the table. Herself coming out of that office. 7 weeks of someone watching her and her not knowing. She thought about that, the particular violation of it, the way it made the past months feel different in retrospect, like a story she had been telling herself about her own competence that had had a different narrator all along. "Make the call," she said. All 3 men looked at her. "It's my situation," she said, "and that's the right option. Make the call." She was not in the room when Rowan made it. She understood that. The call was a negotiation in a language she didn't fully speak between people whose world operated on rules she knew existed, but couldn't navigate herself. She accepted that limitation the same way she accepted most things, with the practical acknowledgement that knowing your edge was not a weakness. She waited in the East Wing with Bobby, in the particular quality of an afternoon that is moving very slowly because everything important is happening somewhere you can't see. Mrs. Hargrove appeared at the door with tea at 4:45. Set it down, said nothing. Left with the quiet efficiency of a woman who expresses everything through action and nothing through speech, which was Dahlia thought possibly the most effective communication style she had ever encountered. She drank the tea. She looked at her hands. Her wrists were still wrapped. The antiseptic smell was fading. In a few days, the marks would fade too, not all the way, not for a while, but enough. The body's insistence on healing, even when the mind wasn't ready, was something she had always found both annoying and necessary. She thought about Daniel, not with the fear she had carried for 8 months, not the specific daily fear of a woman who has left a dangerous situation and knows the situation has not left her. Something different, something flatter. She thought about him the way you think about weather that has already passed, acknowledging its power without granting it any future authority. Because Rowan Fierro was on the phone right now. And whatever else she could say about the man she had known for 3 months, she understood with absolute clarity that when Rowan Fierro put his name on something, Daniel Marsh would need to do a very careful calculation about what he was actually willing to do with that. Rowan came to the East Wing at 5:20. He knocked. She was starting to understand that he always knocked that in a house where he owned every door. This was not an accident, but a choice. "Come in," she said. He came in and sat in the chair across from the window seat where she was perched with her tea and looked at her with the face he used when he was reporting facts. "Daniel won't move," he said. She absorbed that. He agreed. He understood his situation, Rowan said, which was not quite the same thing, and they both knew it. "The names you gave Marcus, 2 of them, are in direct conflict with Daniel's current arrangements. He is not in a position to take on an additional front, particularly not one that involves this family." A pause. "He will not pursue the child. He will not pursue you. I have that in language that is enforceable." She looked at him. "Enforceable, how?" "In ways I won't detail," he said, "but enforceable." She nodded slowly. "And Vivian?" "Vivian contacted Daniel this morning, as we predicted. She told him you were at the estate. By the time she did, I had already spoken to him." Something crossed his face, brief controlled the shadow of something that might in another man have looked like satisfaction. She spent this morning building leverage that had already been made irrelevant. Dahlia thought about Vivian, about the woman who had looked at her in the East Wing 6 weeks ago and filed away what she saw for later use. About the careful, cold intelligence of someone who treated every piece of information as a potential weapon. "Did it cost you," she said, "the call? Whatever you offered Daniel to make him stand down, did it cost you something real?" Rowan looked at her steadily. "Yes." "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be," he said. "It was a cost I chose." He paused. "There's a difference." She looked at him, really looked at him the way she had been allowing herself to do incrementally, since the kitchen that first morning, since the storm, since 2 words delivered to a woman with a leather folder that had sounded less like a statement and more like a declaration. "Why?" she said. "And I need an honest answer, not a strategic one. Why do I matter enough to cost you something real?" He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the late afternoon was doing what late afternoons in Connecticut do, turning gold, and slow the kind of light that makes even ordinary things look considered. "My father," Rowan said finally, "was a man who protected the family as an institution. The name, the structure, the assets." His voice was even, but underneath it, underneath the controlled cadence of it, she could hear the specific weight of someone excavating something they don't usually let people near. He was very good at it, and in protecting the institution, he lost every individual in it. My mother, my brother in the ways that matter. Me for a long time. A pause. "I built what I have using his methods, and I have spent years trying to decide if that was a mistake. If the methods poison the thing you build with them." She didn't say anything. She let it continue. "Last night," he said, "a woman left me a signal using a handkerchief. She had no reason to believe I would understand. She had nothing, no guarantee, no established trust, no rational basis for believing that the owner of the house that had just tried to kill her was her best option." He looked at her directly. She did it anyway, because she was out of options and she was carrying a child and she decided to trust something. He paused. "I haven't had anyone trust me specifically, me, not the name, not the resources, in a very long time. The room was very quiet. Bobby exhaled from the corner, a long, peaceful sound. "That's an honest answer," she said softly. "You asked for one," he said. She set down the tea. "For what it's worth, I didn't have rational basis. You're right about that, but I had read this house for 3 months. I had watched how the staff moved when you were in it and how they moved when you weren't. I had watched how Bobby behaved with you." She looked at him. "Dogs and staff don't trust carefully. They trust correctly. And everything in this house trusted you." He held her gaze. "Including you," he said. She thought about the handkerchief, the deliberate fold, the act of leaving it on a table in a storm, an action that cost her nothing if it failed and might cost her everything if she was wrong about the man who would find it. "Including me," she said. 3 days passed. They were quiet days. The kind of quiet that isn't absence, but presence, the quiet of a house returning to itself after something violent has moved through it. Marcus came and went twice more. Eli sent reports. Mrs. Hargrove moved through the estate with the authority of a woman who had decided that her role in this new configuration was to make it work, and she applied that decision with a thoroughness that brooked no disagreement. On the second morning, Dahlia came down to the kitchen at 5 a.m. Old habit, and found Rowan already there. Same chair, same coffee, Bobby in the corner. "You're always up," she said. "So are you," he said. She sat. He poured the second cup without being asked the way he had been doing it since the first morning, and she accepted it the way she had been doing it since the first morning, which was to say, without comment, but not without noticing. They sat in the early morning quiet for a while. "I have a doctor's appointment Friday," she said. "Next county. Marcus will arrange a car," he said. "I can arrange my own car." "Marcus will arrange a better one," he said. She looked at him. "Are you going to be managing my appointments now?" "I'm going to be ensuring your safety," he said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "The first one," he said, "would require me to care about your schedule. The second one only requires me to care about you." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very fine distinction," she said. "It's an important one," he said. She looked at her hands. The wrappings were off now. The marks had faded to something less urgent, present, but no longer declaring an emergency. "Rowan." "Yes, when the baby comes." She stopped, started again. "I've been on my own for a long time. I'm good at it. I don't need—" She stopped again because the sentence was doing something she hadn't planned, going in a direction that required more honesty than she had braced for at 5 in the morning. "You don't need anyone," he said, not with dismissal, with the recognition of someone who has said the same thing about themselves for years. "I was going to say," she continued carefully, "that I don't need rescuing, but I'm starting to think that's not the same as not needing company." Presence, a pause. "Someone who knocks." He looked at her across the table. "I always knock," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm telling you." Bobby's tail moved once. "Okim." The twist arrived on the fourth day, the way the most important things always do. Not through a dramatic entrance, but through a piece of paper left on Rowan's desk. He found it in the morning in his study, placed precisely in the center of the desk where it could not be missed. Not an envelope, just a single folded page. His name on the outside in handwriting he recognized immediately. Grant's. He opened it. It was not a threat. It was not a negotiation. It was something harder to categorize: a letter, handwritten 3 paragraphs, the handwriting of a man who had stayed up to produce it. It said in the language 2 brothers use when they are dispensing with all the layers and speaking from whatever is left underneath. "I knew about the pregnancy. Vivian told me the night before. I went ahead anyway. I told you I didn't know. That was a lie, and you deserve the truth, and I have no defense that is worth the paper it would take to write it." The second paragraph said, "I don't expect this to change anything between us. I am telling you because you made a decision to believe me that night when you didn't have to, and I have been carrying that for 4 days, and I cannot carry it any further." The third paragraph was one sentence. "She deserves better than this family has given her. Make sure she gets it." Rowan stood in the study for a very long time. He folded the letter along its diagonal. He put it in the top drawer of his desk with the handkerchiefs. Then he walked out of the study and up the stairs, and he knocked on the door of the East Wing guest room. "Come in," she said. He opened the door. She was sitting by the window with a book she wasn't reading, which he could tell because she had been on the same page the last 3 times he had checked. Bobby was beside her. The morning light was doing something particular to the room that he noticed and did not mention. I need to tell you something, he said. She set the book down. Her face went to the expression she used when she was preparing for difficult information. Not afraid, just ready. The readiness of a woman who had taken difficult information before and survived it. He told her about the letter. All of it. He did not soften it. She had asked him once for honest answers over strategic ones, and he intended to honor that even when the honest answer was harder. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, the room was quiet. He knew, she said finally, not with the devastation he had half expected, with the particular quiet of a person absorbing something they had half known and were now simply confirming. Yes, he said, and you believe him that he's telling you now because he couldn't carry it. I believe he wrote the letter, Rowan said carefully. What it means going forward, I don't know yet. She nodded slowly. She looked out the window. He watched her face move through something, not forgiveness, nothing so resolved as that, but a kind of accommodation. The act of a woman making room for a complicated fact in a life that already had several of them. Your family, she said finally, is a great deal of work. He looked at her. Yes, he said, I know. Something happened at the corner of her mouth, small, brief, the cousin of a smile. Good thing, she said. I'm not afraid of work. 6 weeks later, in the main dining room of the Fierro estate, with Mrs. Hargrove at the head of the kitchen, and Bobby under the table and late winter light coming through the windows, at an angle that made everything look like it had been arranged on purpose, Dahlia Ashford ate dinner across from Rowan Fierro and told him the name she had chosen. Eleanor, she said, if it's a girl. And if it isn't, he said. She looked at him. I haven't decided yet. You have opinions about everything else, he said. You'll have an opinion about that. I'll let you know when I have it, she said. He nodded once, picked up his fork. Bobby's tail moved under the table. She looked at her plate. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, running, hiding, reducing herself to the smallest possible version to fit through the smallest possible spaces. She thought about the night she had stood in rising water with her hands bound and looked up at the sky and said a dog's name like a prayer and meant it. She thought about what it meant that the prayer had been answered. Not magically, not without cost or complication, or the long, difficult work of two people learning to occupy the same space honestly, but answered, fully and without reservation. Rowan, she said, yes. She looked at him across the table. Thank you, for the storm, for all of it. He held her gaze, and in the face of a man who had built an empire on control and silence, and the careful management of what he allowed people to see something open, not wide, not dramatically, just enough. The way a door opens when the person on the other side of it has finally been given a key that fits. You left me a signal, he said simply. I followed it. That was all. That was everything. As Bobby exhaled from under the table, long and deep, and entirely at peace with the world, and outside the windows of the Fierro estate, the evening settled into the particular quiet of a place that has survived something terrible and decided against all reasonable expectation to become a home. Dahlia Ashford had come to this house as a ghost. She stayed as something the house had never had before, someone who made Rowan Fierro close the door against the world and mean it, someone who made a 140-pound dog refuse to leave her side, someone who had been buried alive in a storm and come back up breathing. Some people survive, and some people, the ones who fold handkerchiefs into signals and trust dogs and tell the truth even when the truth costs them, do something harder. They stay, and they make staying matter.